In the beginner series, we were introduced to this concept that you don't have to, and in fact, in each one, you shouldn't start hitting the bag with full power. You should take the structural movement that you're training, and you should then bring that into what we call testing structure, so hitting the bag much lighter. And the idea here, as I've said a few times now, is you've got to get the technique correct and then bring it up into what we call the compression set. So when you hit the hit point, when you strike the bag, when you strike a target, that pushes back into the body and it helps the whole structure kind of set into place. And what we don't want to do is just start banging the bag as hard as we can. As much fun as that is, if we want to actually progress, we've got to build technique step by step. So we go step by step, and you can start seeing it now. You can start seeing it in my movement, this kind of structural movement, how Zhang Zhuang kind of locks the body. It teaches the body how to get into these kind of, this infinite number of different sorts of lock points so that you can transmit the force in the correct way. Then we bring it up to just hitting the bag lightly. And then from there, we start hitting it harder and harder. And there's something else that happens here, and this is the idea of Farley. So I want to kind of look at that separately, but you've got to get in your mind at this stage this key concept. I don't keep getting into arguments with people, but every so often I have an argument with somebody who is, well, let's just say they're not on the same page that Wang Xiangjia is on, because Wang Xiangjia is talking about the idea that you already know. You already know the essential stuff. So when people say to me, "Oh, who was your teacher?" and I just wind them up by saying, "Well, I already knew everything that really mattered." Well, I'm not really winding them up. I'm getting the point across that you've got to let go of the wrong path. The right path, as Wang Xiangjia used to say all the time, is that you already know everything that really matters in terms of structural, correct, whole body unified force. So what we say is you don't learn that. You don't learn Farley. What you've got to do is you've got to create the environment where it can emerge. And I don't mean like emerge out of nowhere. You already know how to do it. You can already do it. But it emerges out of all the other movement that you've subsumed it within. Wang Xiangjia taught us like this. He uses these very sociological concepts that you've been socialized into a particular kind of movement, and your natural movement or your natural potential has been subsumed within that. So you don't learn it. There's no secret that someone can pass on to you if you pay them enough or you join the correct so-called lineage or something like that. It's something that you already know. So you've got to create the environment where that movement can start emerging out of all of your other movements. So you start repressing all that socialized movement and allowing that potential to come through. And there's lots of different ways that we do that, but one of the most important ways is we start training our body to do smaller and smaller movements. So we start doing exercises that remove any kind of unnecessary excess movement, and we have to be very strict about this. And some of it, if you were with me doing it, it's usually hilarious, because what looks actually incredibly easy, for example, not to pull your hand back as you do a punch, like the hand that you're punching with, not to pull it back first to get some extra space in there. That's so incredibly difficult not to do when you first start. And that feeling of, if you're going to punch with the left hand, the movement begins on the right hand that Wang Xiangjia taught us about. To get those kinds of things is really, really difficult. It's actually hilarious if you're teaching someone and they're trying to get it, because it's such a basic thing, but it's just been socialized out of you, the ability to do this. Although I wouldn't go that far. I have to say, as a sociologist, I wouldn't go quite that far. It's a dialectic between trained skill and natural ability. I don't think you have that natural ability, like the movement on the left begins on the right or something like that. Well, maybe you do in certain situations, but we don't normally naturally do something like Farley, only when we're startled or we sneeze or something like that. So what we want to move on to next is the next bag work exercise that's in that family. Well, everything's kind of in that family, isn't it? But in terms of bag work, keeping that idea in mind, moving on to the next exercise. And I also want to move on to the bag that I normally train on the gym. So it varies in the gym because it gets worn out, obviously, but it's usually a much heavier bag than I would normally use if I'm training at my secret training base out in the woods, because I couldn't carry out the whole, it was too heavy to carry out the whole bag, so I had to take some of the filler out of it. And normally we build up anyway from a lighter bag to a heavier bag if we can, or a decent pad holder, but a bag is better because we need that compression set experience in our training to give the body the feedback to train it to do what we want it to do. Anyway, the bag is in a funny place, so I've got a bit better at filming in this place, but I didn't quite film it very well in this place, I have to say. Didn't quite catch my back foot, but I'm not filming it again, so it's enough to demonstrate what I want to demonstrate. And the first thing I want us to think about is gloves or no gloves. And actually, it's not necessary to deform your hands, so it's a very different ethic in each one, that you don't want to deform your body as such, but it's okay to toughen your hands. But have a go at this exercise if you get on the heavier bag. So taking the exercise that we did on the lighter bag, the softer bag, when I was training in the first series, the beginner series, and just having a go on a heavier bag and just seeing how that feels. And sure, people do train bare knuckle. I've seen it, I've seen it before. I've talked about it before. The guy that I saw just, practicing banging the bag for like about 25 minutes, totally bare knuckle. So you can train up to do that. But if you have a go at this, you'll see that, it's good for feeling the correct screwing force and the position of the wrist, which is unusual in each one, I know. It doesn't take much of this to really start hurting your knuckles, and by the time you get onto just doing really light. So personally, I prefer, for all my power punching, power hitting, and even for doing most stuff like this, I'll use gloves. But what I will usually do after a bag work session is I'll do a little bit bare knuckle but light. There's absolutely no need to damage your hands. I did all of that when I was younger, like Makiwara and Iron Palm and all that. It was totally unnecessary. What I do is I never wear hand wraps when I put gloves on. And with bag work, that's absolutely enough. You're hitting a bag hard without hand wraps, that's absolutely enough to give you all the toughening in your hands that you'll ever need. I mean, you need some body toughening, but you don't need that extreme hard Qigong. There's no need for it. Just normal training and sparring, usually. A little bit of Ditang training if you do forms and stuff like that. It's absolutely plenty just to give you the toughness that you need. Okay, so let's get on to the exercise, and this has a double purpose to it. So one is to build up, to escalate the amount of force and to try and allow emergence to come through. So we keep the posture itself really tight, no pre-movement. Watch out for that when you see people teaching each one where there's tons and tons of extra either pre or post movement. Yao Zongzong particularly says, that's the point where we've got to eliminate all pre and post movement. So what I'm doing here, I'm just building up slowly. You can see I'm building up slowly, and I'm concentrating on making sure that the way that the posture is, well, what we call rooted, but you can see the pivot root, the way the posture is set, we usually say in each one. Just making sure that that's absolutely correct, and then bringing it up so that step by step. So look, very light. And then we start building. You can see that I'm holding it at the lock point, and I'm doing that very deliberately. See how the bag is pushing back on my hand, and then I'm increasing the power each time, maintaining correct form, but I'm also allowing the bag to come back and land on my hand. And what I'm doing there, in that split second where you release force down into the ground. You can see here as I'm building up again, same footage, as you release force, it locks you into the ground for a split second, because actually human beings are incredibly good at balancing, and balancing is incredibly precarious, and you feel this in this exercise. When the bag comes back and lands against your hand, you feel your whole structure, but you also see how precarious your balance is, how easy it is to push you off balance, and then you realise, this is what happens with that kind of rebound energy. When you release force, it locks you down into the ground, locks you into the target, and just for a split second you're super solid. But a split second later, anything just pushes against you and it wobbles your whole structure. And that teaches you a lot also about your opponent's structure and how easy it is to move them. Okay, so we're going to change into a lead hand hook shortly as I make my mind up what I'm going to do, but what I want you to think about here is the difference between bone alignment and muscle alignment. So the difference between a straight punch and a hook punch, and that's going to become significantly important. Not quite in this video, but as you begin to build the power, you feel the strain on your muscle more. So see, I'm building up step by step. See how small the movement is? Actually, the movement's massive because it's my whole body. A big part of our power in Yiquan, as Wang Xingjai says, comes from our timing in relation to the opponent's structure. Anyway, at this point, that's not what I want you to notice. Look at my lead foot. I want you to notice see how it's going down into the ground, and you can see that force going down into the ground and how it's setting the posture. Watch again. You see that? You could even see it just wobble a little bit as the force went in. And that's something I've talked about before, how the pivot root is actually a weak point, so you have to be very careful. You've got to have the correct overall structural movement. A joint can dissipate force, so that's why your whole structure's got to be correct, and that's why we do this kind of practice. So uppercut, quite a long uppercut, building up, see how it screws in, catches the bag. That's how you do an uppercut in Yiquan on the bag, and then just scoop it in and lift it. You hardly ever see anyone do uppercuts on the bag because they don't know this technique of hitting in with the glove and just like scrunching it, creating a little indent and lifting it up. Again, push down into the ground and don't over lean forward. If you lean forward too much and you miss, you'll just go flying forwards. All your energy goes forwards. You never get this, why you have this kind of straighter lean back with each one uppercut until you miss the bag with it, and then you realise, that's why. You will just go flying forward, particularly with the rear hand. So next we're going to change to overhand, and this has to use sink. It's not a massively big posture, and you can see where it hits into the bag. When you normally see this done in each one, the planting fist goes a lot lower. When you do it with force, of course, it goes a lot lower. But to actually hit into the bag, it's got to be higher, because that's where your target would be. And you've got to drop and sink your weight with it. You've got to use sink to get, the weight of gravity, to get that extra force into it, because there's nothing to release force against. You can't set it against the floor. You can only drop down into it. You can push a little bit from the back leg, but that's all. So step by step, increasing the power step by step, feeling the posture step by step, letting the bag come back and push against you, and that allows your body, it gives your body data to refine your overall structure. And I'm afraid you've just got to be super diligent with this kind of practice. You've just got to get in the gym, relentless training, over and over and over again, building, because even once you've got a single punch done, then you've got to do combinations and so on. Okay, lower punch is exactly the same principles. You hardly ever see this in each one, but it's a lower punch into the body. It's exactly the same principle. See, the structural movement is exactly the same, and we just build up from light touch, and then step by step. Like, you want to do about 3 or 4, and across the 3 or 4 you go from really light to full power, just checking your structure at every stage, locking it at the lock point, and we're going to see why in another video. So build, and each one just tests the structure in a slightly different way, and when the bag comes back and pushes you, it tests your balance. And the thing with that balance is, it doesn't matter, like all this bullshit about people have got some kind of magic rooting skill or something like that. Actually, balance is, unless you like really root down into a horse stance, but even so, someone can just push you. If they push you along your weak axis, balance is incredibly precarious. That's why you've got to be really careful moving in and out, skirmishing with the target, and then once you hit, you've got to be out again, because that is your most vulnerable point, ironically, when you hit. That's something that Yao Zhongzhun talks about as well. But one of the things we want to learn is what it means for our opponent. It also makes your opponent incredibly vulnerable when they hit. Anyway, we're on to rear hand punches now. So just start from our starting position. And you can see we're also trying to eliminate any pre-movement. See, I don't lead with the hand that I'm punching. It doesn't lead out first. The other hand goes... You can't always see it. Sometimes it looks simultaneously, but psychologically the opposite hand moves first. And that's how I ensure that I'm not leading with the lead hand. Or I should say the punching hand. And you can see people when they do that, the hand goes out and the shoulder follows it and the whole body follows it. Whereas in each one, the movement should begin on the other side. So again, nice and light. Rear hand hook, build, let the bag come back, push against your structure, teach you about balance, and then just increase the force. And see, I'm not going across the centre line. All the rules of each one are there. Not crossing that centre line. So when people talk about centre line attack, it's not about attacking the centre line. It's about not going across the centre line. Of course, you do when you hit with power, but this is what we call a template posture. It's like we're trying to do the most absolute perfect version of the posture. So again, look, let the bag come back and push against you. But you need to relax in that moment. Once you've hit, then you go back to your springy defensive structure. And what you're going to find, and we're going to do some other exercises on this, actually, if it doesn't push back directly against your structure, then it's really easy to move your hands. So this idea of being really springily defensive, any slight push on the side of your arm will, if you're not really pushing against it, will just push your arm in. So again, it's letting go of some of these fantasies that people have in Yiquan. That springiness, the reason why the bag can come back and push against the hand like that is because it's directly in line with the transmission of force. That's why the posture is done like this. I'm not going to say my posture is perfect, but the alignment is pretty good. Otherwise, I wouldn't be bothering making videos to tell other people how to do it. The alignment is good. That's why the bag can come back and push against it. The whole structure's locked against it. But it's so precarious. If the bag just pushes a little bit off that angle, it can just push me right off balance. And you can see me struggling with it at certain points because there's nothing you can do about it. Balance is so precarious. I quite like these rear hand punches, how they finish in this kind of Hungar, Southern Shaolin. Look at that, it's like proper Southern Shaolin posture. You can see where lock points come from. You can see where the idea comes from in traditional Chinese wushu. I'm talking over them, but I'm going to put them all up again after this, where you can hear the volume. It's not great sound quality in the gym. That's the problem. There's music playing. There's loads of air conditioning going on. So I will play them afterwards, and you can have a listen, so you can hear with the sound. And also remember, you can't anyway. You can't just make a guttural Yiquan sound all the time. And I can't anyway because I've got problems with my throat. So I always have to make a lighter sound. But you can hear the increasing power. So again, with the rear hand planting first, and you can see again, once you start adding power in now, if you miss it, then you're in trouble. So it starts teaching you about this, and also it's starting to teach you about distancing, because when the opponent moves, or even when we just do a 2-punch combination, all the distancing is going to change. So we need to learn all of that step by step with power against an object. You can't feel any of this. Wang Xinjai himself says this. You can't feel any of the physics that are involved until you start actually hitting something. But the other thing, the last thing to remember is, this is how we're developing or encouraging the emergence of Fa Li. We're keeping it contained. It's like we're contained it in this tight little space. There can't be any pre-movement. There can only be stillness and then movement like that. That's the only thing that there can be. So it's one of the absolute total prerequisites of Fa Li that we're building. Okay, let's have a listen now with sound. As you watch, by the way, please note very carefully that my wrist does twist in that very characteristic Yiquan way, using screwing force. You have to build up to that carefully doing this kind of exercise, so please do be very careful about that. I couldn't just do it straight away. I learnt it like this, step by step. Actually, it's not dangerous at all. It's about getting the technique correct, and then it's actually less dangerous than a normal way of punching, but that's another story.